George Gershwin is a very important composer. I've found out that I have a lot of famous or a lot of favorite composers because this is the last video that I'm doing, and I just get excited to talk about all of them. But I don't think that any of them I get excited as much about as Gershwin. He is so fun, and he actually brings music into the 21st century. 20th century, I should say, 1900s. And he brought jazz music, popular music into the classical hall and just has a huge impact on how the public perceives music. So here we go. He was born in September 26, 1898. His parents had actually immigrated to New York from Russia. He was born to a Jewish family, and he actually changed his name. His original name was his parents did. The original name was Gershowitz, and they changed it to Gershwin, and then actually, by chance, there was a spelling error when they changed it, and it became Gershwin with a W. And so they immigrated to New York from Russia. His family moved a lot, 25 times, because his father changed jobs so often. His father always wanted to be within walking distance of his work, and he was not a super high wage earner, and so he kind of moved from job to job, in factories and that kind of stuff, and so they moved a lot. Gershwin grew up in the streets of New York, so if you've seen Newsies, that is essentially very close to the life he lived. Although he had a family, they had an apartment. But that's the kind of stuff, the kind of image you can have in your head. This is a picture of Brooklyn at the turn of the, or you see the Brooklyn Bridge up there at the turn of the century. And so the sights, sounds, and smells of the city became the foundations for Gershwin's music. We'll see that come into play later on. At first, Gershwin hated music. He said it was sissy stuff. Like he was going to be, a man. He liked playing baseball on the streets, that kind of stuff. But he heard a song drifting through a window once. I believe it was a Melody in F by Rubinstein. So you can go look that up if you'd like. And all of a sudden, he just fell in love with it. Like all of a sudden, he was so excited. And he actually got bored with the street games, and he snuck off to play his friend's piano instead of, playing out in the streets. So Gershwin had an older brother whose name was Ira, and Ira took piano lessons, and so his parents decided to get him, meaning Ira, a piano. Now George was secretly delighted. So here I have a picture of someone hoisting up a piano through a second-story window. That's what they had to do. They lived in an apartment. They couldn't get it into the elevator or up the stairs. I don't know if he even had an elevator. But they had to hoist it up there, and so it was kind of a big operation. But imagine you're the Gershwin parents, and you're buying this piano for your eldest son Ira, and all of a sudden your youngest son George, who's been this like street gang boy, just sits down and starts playing the piano. You would have been, quite shocked, I would imagine. Gershwin became very good at the piano, and he eventually got a job at a place called Tin Pan Alley. And I have a picture over here of Tin Pan Alley, and at Tin Pan Alley, it was a place where a bunch of music publishers had their offices. So how music worked back then, and then I'm talking about popular music, not classical music. So popular music that would make records, they would perform it in, jazz clubs and that kind of stuff. They would employ a bunch of people who were able to sing and play piano, and they would employ them to perform these songs, a certain set of songs, for famous musicians who came in. So if you're like, Taylor Swift or someone, you would come into a music publisher like this. You would sit down in a room with maybe another person and then this person at the piano, and George was this person who would get a list of songs, and he would have to play it and sing it for them. And then if the musician was interested in it, they would say, okay, I might be interested in this one. Can you play it in the key of F instead of the key of E flat, and I'll try and sing it and see if I like it. And so Gershwin really developed his piano chops here, being able to play in any key, being able to play it just at a moment's notice. And he also absorbed a lot of those styles of these other jazz musicians. But he soon got bored playing the same songs, and he started to try and sell his own songs, which he wasn't supposed to do. And so Gershwin, tried to sell some of his own songs, and by this time he was actually good enough to be a piano player on Broadway, and that's actually what he went and did. He stopped playing at Tin Pan Alley and went to Broadway. I should mention Tin Pan Alley, the reason it's called that is because when you have hundreds of pianos being played at the exact same time, it just sounds like someone's banging tin pans together. Somebody actually wrote that as a criticism in the newspapers, but they're like, that's great, let's just name it Tin Pan Alley, and so they did. So while on Broadway, Gershwin did start to compose some musicals and some songs that were used in musicals, and his first big break was a song by the name of Swanee, and it became a huge hit. I'll link this song to a YouTube link in Google Classroom for you to go and watch. If you search this on your own, you're going to find a lot of performances that are performed with someone in blackface. If you know about blackface, it's where a white person paints their face black, and it's really derogatory and not, it's extremely, incredibly racist. So I would not recommend watching those because they were trying to make themselves black for whatever purpose. So don't do that. There are performances of Ali Olsen, who's the guy singing it in blackface. But this was Gershwin's first break, and so he was now a professional composer. This song earned him a lot of money, a lot of fame, and so he could, kind of get on with his life. So Gershwin wrote what we call popular music. And popular music was considered far too trashy to be performed in a concert hall with other classical music. So you, even like today, you have people who are like classical music snobs. Hopefully I'm with all these lectures, I'm helping you understand that it's not that inaccessible for you. And then there's like the rest of the world. And so those two were kind of separated out. But Swanee was actually performed in a classical theater with Gershwin at the piano. And for the first time, critics talked about jazz and classical music in the same sentence. Now, they weren't that complimentary of jazz, of course, but they did start to talk about it. A guy by the name of Paul Whitman wanted Gershwin to write an orchestral jazz piece. Gershwin initially refused because he didn't think that was gonna work. But Whitman tricked him into it by publishing a flyer in the paper. So you're George Gershwin, you open up your morning paper with your coffee, and you see a flyer telling you that you're going to be performing or composing this jazz orchestral piece. Whitman actually tricked him, and later he told Gershwin that, well, someone else was going to do it, so I figured that we better get the jump on him so that we were the first ones to do it. So Gershwin composed a song called Rhapsody in Blue, and it began with a clarinet wail. Again, the public loved it, but the critics didn't. And you see the beginning clarinet wail here written out. It begins with a trill on a low G, and then what's supposed to happen is the clarinet is supposed to make all these sound like a glissando. It's just like one note that slides from bottom to top. The problem was that classical clarinet players were not used to doing this. And so what happened was Gershwin went out and found a jazz clarinetist that thought that he could do this. And so a jazz clarinet player ended up playing with the professional classical orchestra for the performance of Rhapsody in Blue. So again, I'll link this. Rhapsody in Blue is actually a piano concerto. So it's a piano solo, but it has orchestra accompaniment with it. But yet the most famous thing about this is that beginning clarinet wail, because as soon as this was played in that classical hall, people were just like glued to their seats and they loved it. It was really, really impressive. So go listen to Rhapsody in Blue. So this song gained Gershwin a lot of fame, so he and his brother Ira actually began writing songs together. Gershwin would write the piano and the music, and Ira would write the notes. The lyrics. Ira would write the lyrics. Gershwin's fame for composing a classical jazz piece, this Rhapsody in Blue, took him around the world, and he attended performances of Rhapsody in Blue everywhere, including Paris. Now, while he was in Paris, he got an idea for another piece of music. Remember when I said that the sights, sounds, and smells of New York City streets became the foundation for George's music? He noticed that Paris had a very different feel, a completely different set of sights and sounds and smells, and so he wanted to try and bring this back with him. So he bought taxi horns because they were very different sounding, and upon his return, Gershwin started writing, and the song he wrote was called An American in Paris. And this is a tone poem where it's supposed to make you think of something. And what it's supposed to depict is exactly what I have written down there. It's an American walking down the Champs-Élysées, which is the main drag and shopping center in Paris. So I'll move myself over here. And as you can see the picture, this right here is the Arc de Triomphe, which Napoleon built as a monument to himself because he was so awesome, because he conquered Europe at that time. And this is a massive, like, 10-lane roundabout. I've actually stood on this street corner and took a picture of this, of the Arc de Triomphe. And this street right here, I believe, is the Champs-Élysées, which is a huge shopping center. It's just a massive outdoor mall, tons of shops and stuff all along up here. And then I think at the end of this road over here, like, is the Louvre or something. All these streets come together, connect things. Like, down one's Eiffel Tower, down one is the Louvre, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, An American in Paris is exactly what that's supposed to be. And because Gershwin was an American in Paris, he felt supremely qualified to write this song. I'm going to go link it. I should say the song, as you go in the mall, you will notice as you walk, you'll notice that every store has its own brand of music. So Hot Topic sounds different from Von Maur, sounds different from The Buckle, all those stores. And as you walk down the shopping center, you hear all this music coming out of the storefronts. And there are times where he gets honked at by taxis. He, steps off the curb and gets honked at. There are other times where he hears random pieces of music coming out the door. There's another place where he goes inside and he stays for a while and listens to this style of music. I actually wrote a fairly long research paper about the American in Paris. So I have a lot of information about that if you would like it. You can even cite my paper if you'd like in your research if you're doing Gershwin. So Gershwin wrote a lot of successful pieces. He wrote the first American opera, which is called Porgy and Bess. I believe there's actually a movie musical of this one, not a new one, kind of an older version. And it's about a disabled African-American beggar in the early 1900s. So most of the time operas, over in Europe did not involve black people or depicting black people. And so this was, one of the very first ones Gershwin wrote to do this and bring in the influence of African-American culture into, again, popular music. Jazz started with African-Americans getting their hands on these instruments and influencing them in their own way. And Gershwin was one to bring this into the classical stage. So Gershwin began to have strange memory lapses towards the end of his life. He couldn't remember some of his piano pieces while he was playing. And in 1937, he actually went into a coma. He was rushed to the hospital where they attempted to perform surgery. And after the surgery, Gershwin actually never recovered. And he was very young. He was another Mozart type where he died at an early age before he really gifted all of his musical knowledge to us. And so it's quite sad that he wasn't alive for very long. So Gershwin is remembered for bringing jazz into the concert hall as serious music. And the big thing you might find as you research is that critics didn't like how he composed, but they couldn't deny his skills with jazz. So the public loved it because, again, the vast majority of people would enjoy this popular music. That's why it's called popular music. Even though the classical critics and people, high class snobs, really didn't like it as much. So that's about Gershwin. Feel free to reach out if you have more questions. Watch all the YouTube links of his songs that I have and do some more. Thanks.